Hello and welcome to part 2 of the saving and loading tutorial. In the last tutorial, we finished up the save manager, and we were not at a super great stopping point, but I kind of wanted to end it because it was getting super long. So we will just continue right where we left off. So the one thing we need to do is go to the tutorial character, or whatever your character class is. No, sorry, not the character. Go to the game mode .h file. If you're using blueprints, well, I don't know how far, I don't know how you got this far if you're using blueprints, but if your game mode is currently in a blueprint, you're gonna need to create a C++ class for it, like a parent class for it, so you can do this part, because you need access to a C++ function in the game mode base. So if you look over here in game mode base, you can see there's this init game state function, and I found that this is a good place to do what I need to do. So we'll go back to our tutorial game mode, and we want to override that function. So what was it called? I'll just copy it. Init game state. So paste that in here, and we can add the override keyword to the end of it since we're overriding it. And this is what it's called, I guess, when the game state gets initialized, but it's a good place to do a couple things that we need to do. So we'll go ahead and define that real quick, and I'll show you what we need to put in here. So kill that, kill that. Okay, so in this function, we want to call two of our save manager functions. So we're going to want to include save manager, which again is just that giant class that we just finished creating. And since all of the save manager functions are static, we can just say save manager, I guess it's save manager ::, and the first one we want is query all save interfaces. And again, we haven't filled out this function yet. We'll get to it later, but it's something that's we want to happen at the very beginning when the game first launches. And the other thing we want to happen is we want to load the game. And also we need to not forget to call the parents init game state, because otherwise we'll probably mess some things up. Okay. So now we got that. There's one other function we need to call, and that is the save manager init function. But we don't want to call it from there because we want to call it from so this gets called when the game state is initialized. So like when we actually load into the game, or like load into the level, is this when this will be called. And of course that's when we want to actually load it. We don't want to load it during the main menu because there's nothing to load. But for the init, we want that to happen like right when the game first launches, because if you look at it, what this is doing is it's ensuring that that metadata file exists, and so we definitely want that to happen super early. So a good place for that is to put it in your game instance. So we're going to need to go ahead and create one of those. So right click, create new C++ class, and is it in this list? I feel like nothing's in this list that I want to be in this list. No, I don't think it is, or maybe I just didn't see it. So click that little checkbox, and we're going to create our own game instance in C++. It's not going to be anything crazy, it's just going to be like one little, or a couple little lines here. And we'll call it, let's say my game instance. I think that's what it was already called, but whatever. My game instance. And we'll let this create. It's mad at us. That's fine. Okay. So now we have our my game instance. And we will say public, and we want to override a function. And the one we want to override is the init function, which is in here somewhere, right here. This one is what we want to override. So we will copy that and come back. and say override. And like it says, it gets called to an opportunity to set up what is needed. Super descriptive. And in our case, we need to call init for our game, or our save manager. So we'll go ahead and define this over here. Kill that, kill that, kill that. And this is a my game instance? No. My game instance. Oops. All right, and we want to again call super init so that still gets called. And I believe the only thing we want to do in here is just say save manager, which we need to include first. Include save manager. So use save manager init. Okay, so now we got our init being called, we got our query function being called, and we got our load being called. Let me think what we need to do next. One thing, well, let's get this compiling here because it was not happy with us last time. If you guys haven't seen this, I used this to compile. It's just under Windows, Developer Tools, Modules, and I've dragged it up here to the top left corner because it works better than this button. Sometimes this button doesn't really work. And I just search for the name of my project, which is tutorial, and I hit recompile. You can use this compile button. I have found that it does not really work that well though. So, okay, so we're getting an error here. Unresolved external symbol, current save slot. Ah, yes, okay. So what it's yelling about is over in our save manager, we created, am I recording? Yes, I am, okay. I almost freaked out. Is we created a static variable, and anytime you create a static variable in a header file, you need to bring it over to the CPP like this, and like scope it in so that it knows about it. And this is kind of what that looks like. Just say string, save manager, current save slot. And we don't need to set it to anything because we're setting it to something right here. So let's see if Unreal is happy with us now. Hopefully it is. All right, so it's pretty happy. So we created a game instance, but we need to set it. So we'll come over here and go to project settings and maps and modes. And down here at the bottom, we want to change the game instance to the one we just created, which is my game instance. And that seems good. I'm just checking my notes. There's a lot of things I'm trying to remember here. Okay, I think we can move on to the load menu now. So back in our content folder, we have our, where's my menus? Oh, I put them in here. Oh, I guess that's okay. So we have our widgets folder, and we only have the main menu widget, which is currently looking pretty good. We can come over here to our graph, and we can start filling out some of these. I'm not sure if we can get them all filled out. We might be able to. But we can start using those functions. I'm going to delete these because ain't nobody got time for that. And we will say get new save slot. So this is for the new, when the new game button gets pressed. The first thing we want to do is we're going to want to get a new save slot because we're creating a new game, obviously. So the slot found is, we want to create a branch off of that. Oh, and I can show you what I was talking about earlier. So you can see how it says slot found and slot as the two return types. If we come back here and we look at our get new save slot, you can see I have the return variable called, I purposely or I explicitly said that it's called slot. And that's why it's called slot here. If I didn't put that, it would just say like result or return or some default thing. So that's what that does. All right, so we check if the new slot was found, and if it was, then we want to call set current save slot. And if you're wondering where these functions are coming from, again, there's static functions. If you double click on them, you can see they're static functions, so we can just call them anywhere, which is really nice. But they're all just part of that save manager. You can see if you hover over it, it says target is save manager. So we'll drag that in. So we get a new slot, make sure it's good. If it's not good, you're going to want to handle this however your game handles this. You know, like if you've run out of save slots, you're going to want to display some sort of pop-up that says like, hey, maybe try deleting something someday or something like that to let them know. But for now, we'll just print out a debug that says like, no save slots found. All right, but assuming it was found, which I'm sure it will, we just want to say open level, because right now we're in the main menu level, and we want to open the actual level, which I think if we go back to maps, we want this one, third person example map. Copy that, paste it in there. All right, so all this is doing is create a new game, we get a new available save slot, make sure it's peachy, and then we set it, and then we open the level. And that seems pretty good. Now, after that, well, okay, so we have the load game button that we need to fill out. We can't quite fill this one out entirely yet, but what we can do is we can at least remove ourselves from the parent. So what that will do is it will hide this screen, and then we will eventually show the load game screen, but we don't have that yet, so we'll just leave it like that. And then quit game is pretty simple. We can just say quit game, and that's that. So let me just run this and make sure it kind of looks the way I expect it to look. So if we double click main menu, oh, there are some more things we have to do, yeah. So if we double click main menu, if we just run it, we're not going to see anything because we haven't actually displayed that widget yet. You also saw on the top left, it printed out some of the saving and loading stuff, and we don't want that. And the reason that that is happening is because the game mode is still set to, if we look, well, it's not going to show us there, but if we look, the game mode is, by default, it is set to, where is it? Yeah, up here, tutorial game mode. And so that's the game mode it's using even when we're in the main menu, but we don't really want that. So we'll go back to our main menu level, and we'll say, let's override this and just use the normal game mode. For your real game, you might want to make like a main menu game mode or something, but we just want to use the normal game mode so that, if you remember, in our game mode, we added this loading code and query code. We don't want that to happen during the main menu because there's nothing to load, so that's why we want to change that. The other thing we want to do is, obviously, we don't want to see a black screen when we run it. We want to see our widget. So we can show our widget in the level blueprint. So if you come up here to blueprints and you click open level blueprint, it will open the level blueprint, believe it or not. And we don't need the tick, but we do want to have the begin play. And in here, we want to do a couple things. The first thing we want to do is create our main menu widget, which is, I think, create widget. Yep. And we want to say main menu widget, and it needs the player. So we'll say get player controller, like so. So now we have the widget created. We just need to add it to our viewport. So add to viewport. And a couple other things we need to do is we want to set the input mode to UI only. And we need to do this so that we can interact with the UI. I kind of like doing this type of line structure whenever I'm using something more than once. And we can even say that the widget in focus is this guy that we just created, the main menu widget. And we also want to make sure that the mouse cursor is shown so that we can click things. So set show mouse cursor to true. We'll make another reroute, drag this up like that. And that's all we need to do for that. And before I forget, so since we're setting the input mode to UI only, and we're showing the mouse cursor, we want to make sure we undo that when we go back to the main level. So if we go back to the main level and we go to blueprints, open level blueprint, we basically just want to do the opposite of what we just did. So we want to look for the event begin play and simply get player controller, set input mode game only, and we also want to hide the cursor. Set show mouse cursor to false. Okay, so now let's go back to our main menu, and if we run this, we should, yep. So now we see our stuff. If we press quit, it exits. If we press load, it just removes the current widget because we don't have the load widget yet. And if we hit new game, you'll see it's already loaded the save slot 0. And you see it printed out save and load, and that's because of that thing I was talking about where it will save to it if it doesn't currently exist. And if we run it again, you'll see it already went up to save slot 1, and we run it again, save slot 2, save slot 2. So it's already giving us a new save slot every time, so that's already working, so that's good. But we want to actually be able to click on this load game and see the currently available slots that we have. So that's what we'll do next. So we need to make some more widgets. Let's go back to blueprints, or no, we'll go back to widgets. And we'll create a new user widget, and it will be called load menu underscore widget. So we'll double click on this. And actually what I'm going to do is come over to this one, go to designer, and copy this uniform grid panel over. Actually, should I do that? It might just be easier to type it. Actually, I'm not going to do that. We'll just do it because I don't think it's quite similar enough. So we're going to want a uniform grid panel, and we're going to want another vertical box, and we're going to want some text. Oh, we need to make sure the vertical box is stretched, and we're going to want some text. And the text we want to set to auto, and we want aligned, and we want top. And I think we had 100 last time. And what did we set the size to? 50. So we'll set it to 50 again. Okay, and then down below, we want to have that menu for selecting which game you want to load. So let's just add another little text box here and put it in the center. Give it some padding, and we'll call it load game, just as a little header. And then after that, we want the slot widget itself, and then we just want a back button. Now, the slot widget itself, the one that's going to have the list of all the available slots, we're going to make that as a separate widget. So we'll do that in a second, but the last thing we want in here is that back button. So for that, we need a size box so that it's not ridiculously large. And we want to set that to centered, and we want to override the width, and we'll set it to like 400. And inside here, we want to drag a button and some text. And we'll rename this to back button. And this will just say back. The color will be blue. And that seems good. We'll hook up this back button real quick, just since we're here. So click on the back button, scroll down, click on clicked. We want to remove ourselves from the parent. and we want to create a new main menu widget since we're going back to the main menu. So create widget, main menu widget, and we want to get the owning player, and we want to add that to the viewport like so. So that's all we can do right now because we need to first create the slot widget thingy. So to do that, we'll come back here and we'll create another widget, and we will call it slot list, which again is just going to be a list of all the available slots that we can load. So if we double click on this, we're going to want to change this up here. We're going to want to change this to custom because we want it to be a custom size. And we'll do like 600 by 500. And in here, we will delete this canvas panel because nobody ever likes those. We will add a uniform grid panel. And we want a size box. And the reason we want a size box, because we're going to make a size box and we're going to make it, actually we want a center, I think. And we're going to make it the exact same size as what we put up here at the top. And the reason we want to do that is because if we drag this widget into another widget, we want to make sure that it actually stays this size. So that's why that is like that. And we'll add a little border to make it kind of look nice. And we'll make a background color. Is this the background? Yeah. We'll make it like almost black, but not quite. We'll give it a little opacity. Something like that. That looks good. So 0.01s and then 0.8. And then inside the border, we're going to want a uniform grid panel. And we want two things in here. We want a text. And this text is going to say no saved games found. And of course, we're not always going to show this, but we are going to show this in some cases. And I'm going to say it's italic because I think that looks a little nicer. And I guess that's probably fine just like that. You can center it or make it somewhere better if you want, but that's where it's going to go. And the last thing we want is something called a list view, which if you haven't used one of these before, it might be a little confusing, but it's basically just like a widget that lets you display a list of other widgets. And for us, it's going to be the slots that it's displaying. I'm just going to rename this the list view so it's not so ugly. Apparently I can't. Maybe my list view. Okay. And if you can see here, if we hide this, it's saying no entry widget class specified on this list. Even if doing custom stuff, this is always required as a fallback. So it wants us to specify a entry widget class. And to do that, we need to create one. And what the entry widget class is it's basically the class that it's going to display for each entry in the widget. So we need to create one of those. Real quick, let's quickly make this thing visibility set up correctly, because we only want to see no saved games if there's actually no saved games. So click on no saved games, and over on the right, search for visibility. We want to create a binding for that. And I'm going to rename this to get no saved games visibility. And I'm also going to put it in a binding category, or maybe bindings. And we can make it const, and it should probably be private as well. All that stuff that I just did is just kind of, you don't really have to do it, but it's good practice. Okay, so we just want to check right here if there are any saved games. So to do that, we can use this function that we made back over here in the Save Manager for get all save metadata. So we'll say get all save metadata, and this returns to us an array. And we just want to say if there's anything in this array, then obviously there's some sort of saved game. So we want to say the length is int greater than 0, we can do a select and hook that return value up here. And now we can simply just select. So if the length is greater than 0, that means there are games that currently exist. So we want to hide this. So we'll set it to collapsed. If it's not, then we want it to be visible because there's no saved games. So we want to show that there's that little message that says there's no saved games. Okay, so that's good. So now we really just need to fix this error that it's giving us about the entry widget. And you can specify the entry widget somewhere in here. If you click My List View, yeah, so it's right here. And if you look, there's currently no options that we can select from because I guess there's just none by default. But we can create one. So to do that, we will come back here and we will create another widget. And this is the last widget we have to create, I promise. And it will be called slot list entry widget. Now, one thing that you have to do special for this guy is go over to the graph section, and in the class settings, we have to implement a interface for it. And I'm just trying to check which one it is real quick. Yeah. So over here, click add and type in user object list entry. And this will basically make it a candidate for us to select. So if we go back to our slot list widget and we click on this and we come here, you can see the one we just create is now an option, so we can select it. But currently it's there's nothing actually in it, so it doesn't show as anything, but we can add some stuff to it and it will look pretty good. So come back here to designer, and we want to basically create a widget that represents a slot. So if you remember from the video at the beginning, my slots were like long, small strips, which had the slot name on the left, the date on the right, and then on the very right there was an X button to delete it. So we're going to do that. So again, we want to do custom, because we want a custom size, and we'll say 600 by 32, pretty tiny here. Again, delete the canvas panel because nobody likes those. And we want a uniform grid panel, and we want a horizontal box, and we want a button for button. So this button, or I think I need to fix the horizontal box. So click on horizontal box. Yeah, it needs to be this and this, so it stretches out. And this we want to rename to slot button. And this we want to set to fill, so it fills the whole thing. And we want to add another horizontal box inside of that button, believe it or not. And on the left, so we want to add two things. We want to add text and text, so two texts. And we want to make sure the horizontal box is also set to stretch on both the horizontal and vertical. And then we have two texts here. One's going to be the slot name and one's going to be the slot date. So for this one, we want to set it to fill and stretch horizontally and centered. And for this one, we also want to set it to fill, and we want it to be on the right, and we want it to be centered. Now, obviously, these don't look too great yet, so we need to change, let's change the color to blue, and the size to like 12 maybe, and probably regular text is good. Okay, and we want to rename these. So this is going to be the slot name, and this is going to be the slot date. And the last thing we want is a button. So we will bring a button in and drag it into the horizontal box. And you can see it kind of pops over here on the right-hand side, which is exactly where we want it. Although, wait, we did that wrong. We want this to be part of this horizontal box up here. So it adds a little separation here. And this is going to be the delete button, so we'll rename it. And inside here, we're just going to add a text box and give it a capital X to make it kind of look like an X. So text, capital X. And we'll do size 12. And we want the color to be blue. So there, it kind of looks like a little X button. And so we have two buttons here that we need to bind. The slot button, so the slot button, when you click on it, it will basically load the slot, and the delete button will delete the slot. So we can go ahead and create those two bindings. So click on slot button, and then scroll down and click on onClicked. And do the same thing for the delete button. All right, so back in our slot list entry widget, we can go ahead and start filling out these functions. So when they click on a slot, we basically want to load that slot and like open the level. But we kind of have a problem because we don't know which slot this button represents yet. So the way that works is basically we need to override a function called event on list item object set. And this will get called whenever the object, in this case the slot, that this entry represents gets set. So we're going to have to create a quick little C++ class for this because we need an object, we need a U object that can hold on to the information about the slot. So to do that, we'll just come back over here, make another C++ class, and we just want this to be an object, and we'll just call it a slot object, and we'll go ahead and create that. Sorry. Okay, so we have our slot object, and in the header file, we need to create a few things. The first thing we really need is we need to save the save metadata that this slot object holds onto or represents. So we need to include our save metadata, and we'll come down here and we'll say f save metadata, and we'll call it set metadata. We can just initialize it to some empty struct. And this needs to be a U property because we're going to need access to it, and we want it to be blueprint read only. And the category is going to be just slot object, I guess is fine. And we're going to want to be able to set this whenever we create this object. So in Blueprint, you can just say expose it on spawn, and you can also do that in C++ by saying meta equals expose on spawn equals true. And because we're exposing it on spawn and it's private, it's going to be very mad at us. So we need to say allow private access equals true. So this way we can keep it as private, but we can also expose it on spawn and make it blueprint read only. So now we have the save metadata that it represents, and we just need to make two little functions for modifying that. So we want to make one called void, or I'm just thinking maybe we should just make this public in the interest of time. We'll just make it public. And we don't need allow private access, we just need expose on spawn. And this will save us some time. So yeah, it just holds on to the save metadata. And the reason we can't use save metadata, like the reason we have to create a wrapper around it, is because this value that comes in, it has to be a U object, and our metadata is just a struct, which is not a U object. So that's really the only reason we need this. So let's just save this, and we'll come back here and compile. And then we should be able to do a little bit more. Okay, so come back here, and if this isn't really totally making sense to you quite yet, just stick with me. Once I am able to do a little bit more coding and show you how it all works together, I think it'll make some more sense. So again, this is just the object that our entry represents, and we know that it's going to be a slot object. Cast to slot. Why does that not show up? Did it not actually compile? Let me try compiling again real quick. We did call it slot object, didn't we? Yes, okay. Oh, it's because, right, I almost forgot. So the slot object needs to be a blueprint type in order for us to see it. So put blueprint type and then compile it again. And that's the reason why we couldn't actually see it. Okay, so come back in here and we will cast it to a slot object. And we just want to save this because we're going to use it later. So right click and promote to variable. And we want to save this as our slot object. Okay, now we can do a little bit more here with these functions than before. So let me just get my notes back. Okay, so when they click on the slot, we basically want to load the slot. So the first thing we need to do is figure out which slot it is. So we have the slot object right here. We want to get the save metadata from that. And we can split this. And so now we have the slot name and the metadata date. We really only care about the slot name because we want to set the current slot to whichever one they clicked. So we'll say set current save slot to that slot, like so. And we will open the level, which, let me go get the name of that. Here it is. So it is third person example map. So again, all we're doing is when they click on the button, which is they just click right here somewhere, it will, or we will get the name of the slot that this entry represents. We will set the current save slot to that slot, and then we will open the level. Now the other thing we need to do is handle this delete button. Now this is a little bit more complex. I mean, it's not that confusing, but it's not quite as simple as just removing it right here because we don't have access to the list because we are inside of the entry itself. We don't have access to the whole list of them. So the way we can handle that is by creating a little event and just calling that event. And the list we can set up to listen to that event, and then when it gets it, it will delete it. So if that doesn't make sense yet, just hold tight. It will pretty soon. So the way we create an event is pretty ridiculous. It's called all uppercase declare dynamic underscore multicast delegate. And you can see there's a bunch of different ones for 8, 5, 4, 9, 1, 7, for however many parameters you want to pass. In our case, we only want to pass one parameter, so we'll say one parameter. And the first thing you got to give it is a name, and I believe it has to start with F. So we'll say F on slot deleted, and then you give it the parameter, and it takes it in as two parameters, the parameter name, or sorry, the parameter type, and then the parameter name. So the parameter type is the slot object, because we're going to be passing the slot object that we want to delete, and it's a pointer. Make sure you put pointer, and then the name we'll just put slot, and then we can put a semicolon. So now we've defined, or we've declared our multicast delegate, which is basically just an event. And we want to add that to our class somewhere in the public section. So we'll create an instance of it and say on slot deleted. And it's going to be a little unhappy with us until we can compile, but these red lines are not actually issues, so just ignore that. And we need to make it a U property. And this is an event that we want to call from Blueprints, and we want to assign to it in Blueprints. So we need to put two tags. We need to say it's blueprint assignable and it's blueprint callable. And we give it a category of slot object as well. So again, this is just an event that we're going to call whenever that X button gets pressed, and it will get propagated up to the list itself, and then the list can remove that entry from itself. So we don't actually need to do anything else in here. We'll just be accessing this variable in the land of blueprints. So we just want to compile, so we'll come back over here and compile. It's very mad. Unknown aerial. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Blueprint assignable. Let's try this again. Still mad. What did I do? Error. Remember variable declaration missing variable type. What? Oh. So that's because I put a semicolon right here. It doesn't like it when you do that. Sorry. And we'll try compiling again. Hopefully it works this time. Okay, there we go. So now we can come back, and in here, our slot object, which has that event, we're going to want to call it from here. And the slot is this guy. So we're saying, hey, I was deleted, and we're just sending that event out, and whoever listens for it, we don't really know, but somebody's going to be listening for it, and that person is going to be the slot list. So if you come back to the slot list, you can already see we kind of have some things going on here, but not quite right. We want to make sure that this is set to stretched, and that looks much better. So it's displaying 5, and the reason it's displaying 5 is because it's just displaying however many you set over. Where is that? There's a thing over here somewhere. Yeah, here it is. Number design preview entries. So these are just preview entries. You can change this to be higher or lower. And you can see if it gets too high, it'll even add a nice little scroll bar for you. But we'll just keep it as 5 to see what it looks like. All right, so come back here. Or, oops, no, not there. We need to go back to the event graph. So, because there's some things we need to do in this slot list. So go back to the graph and then come to event graph. And let me figure out here what we need to do. Okay, so we only need the event construct. So we will just be using this. And basically what we want to do is we want to loop over all of these guys that currently exist, and we want to tell them which slot they're actually representing so that they know. So to do that, we will say get all save metadata. So get all the saved games, basically, and we'll do a for each loop. So for each save game that we know about in the metadata file, we want to create one of these entries, right? One of these entries for. So to do that, we need to create a slot object because these entries all need a slot object in order to have something to reference. So we're going to say construct object, and we want to construct the slot object, and the outer is our self. And you can see right here the metadata. The reason that's showing up right there is because back in C++ we said expose on spawn equals true for our save metadata. So it's really convenient. We can just hook that up like that and like that. And then we need to take this and we need to add it to our list view. So our list view is this widget right here. So we just have that as a variable. We can drag it in and we'll say add item And as you can see, it wants a object, which is our slot object. So we'll drag it in like that. And so what I was trying to explain before, probably kind of poorly, is when I add something to the list view, once it gets added, that's what triggers this function over here, event on list item object set, because we actually set it. And it gives us that object. So this object right here is whatever object we pass to add item. And of course, we have to cast it back to a slot object because that's where we're passing it initially. But we know it's a slot object, so we can do that no problem. So that's what's kind of going on there. There is one little thing we need to do in between here, between creating it and adding it, is we need to hook up, if you remember, we have this delete button, and when we call delete, we're just basically broadcasting this message that say, hey, I was deleted, but nobody's currently listening for that. But we need the list to listen to that so that he knows to delete that slot. So basically what we can do is off of this guy, our slot object, we can say assign on slot deleted. And this on slot deleted, just to refresh, is this multicast thing that we created. So it's this guy. And the reason we can assign to it is because we said blueprint assignable. And the reason we can call it from the other class, or from the other widget, is because it says blueprint callable. So we'll come back here, and we want to bind to this. And I'm going to fix these lines so they don't look so messy. That's a little better. Okay. So basically we're saying whenever onslot deleted gets called, call this event. And I'll just rename it to onslot deleted. And it's passing us the slot because you can see back in here, we said it has one parameter, and that parameter is a uslot pointer, and it's called slot. So it's passing us a uslot pointer, or not a uslot pointer, a uslot object pointer, and the name of it is slot. So this is the slot that's trying to be deleted. So the first thing we want to do is just, instead of adding it to the list view, we want to remove it. So remove item. And the item that we want to remove is the slot. Now, that's good. We definitely want to do that. But we also need to remember that we also actually want to delete this slot, because we don't just want to remove it from the UI, we actually want to delete the slot. So to do that, we can call our delete slot function that we made a long time ago in the Save Manager. Here it is right here, delete slot. And it just takes in a slot name. And we can very easily get the slot name from the slot. Make a little reroute node here and say get save metadata. And we'll split this structure and we'll plug it in there. So now we remove it from the UI, and then we also remove it from like the hard drive, basically. We totally delete the slot. And this will take care of deleting the slot itself and deleting it from the metadata. So this is basically all we need to do there. There is one thing I realized we forgot to do. If you come back here to, not this one. If we go back to the slot list entry widget, and we go to the designer tab, we need to actually bind the slot name and the slot date to say the correct slot name and the slot date, because right now it just says whatever we type here. So click on the slot name and go over to bind, and we're going to want to create a binding, and we will rename this to get slot name. And again, I like to put these in a category called bindings and make them private and constant. So we just need to get the slot name, and we can do that from the slot object. We'll just get the metadata again. We'll split it, and we'll drag that up there. And that gets the slot name. And we need to do the same thing for the date. So we'll come back here, click on the date, binding, create binding. Drag this up to bindings. We like it private and constant. We'll rename it to get slot date. And to do that, we just get the slot object, get the metadata, split it again, and there's a way to convert this. I think it's to date or something. I'm gonna have to look. Hold on. It is called as date time. As date time. So this will convert the date to a nice little text thing that we can see. Okay, so that was a lot of stuff. Trying to think if I forgot anything. We'll have to run it and see, I guess. So yeah, so let's go ahead and run this. I'm kind of not really sure if I got everything, but find out soon enough. So we click on load game. Oh, right. We didn't actually hook that up. So stop this. Go to the main menu widget. Go to graph. And then in the on clicked load game button, we need to actually hook that up to do something. So we're already removing ourselves, which is good. But we want to create the load menu widget. So create widget and type in load menu widget. And we can get the owning player to use right here. And we want to add this to the viewport. Okay, let's see if this is now better. So we'll run it. Load game. Ah, yes, we forgot to actually add the slot list into our load menu screen. So go back here. Over here on the left, in between the load game and the size box, we want to add our slot list. So we can come up here and type and search for it. So we have our slot list. Drag that in into our vertical box, and you can see there it is. And click this little up arrow, and we'll move it up. And let's try this again. Compile, save, run, load game, and there we go. So you can already see it's working, and these are here because I ran it a few times earlier to test if it was working. But I have my default slot, which the default slot is going to be a slot that shows up if you run the game not through the main menu. If you just run it straight from the level with the character that runs around, it will create a default slot for you. But hopefully if we click on one of these, it, yep, deletes it, deletes it, deletes it, deletes it, and now it says no save games found. If I hit back and go back into it, they're still gone. And let's make sure that they are still gone if I run it again, which they are. Good. And let's make a new game. And you can see it says save slot 0 was created, or was loaded and saved, which is exactly what we expected. If we close it and run it again and go to load game, we got save slot 0, which looks good. If we make a new one, we should get save slot 1. All right, so this all seems to be working pretty well. I'll show you the default thing just so you're not too confused if it happens to you. So if you open the third-person example map and you run it, you'll see it says loaded default. And the reason it does that is because the code that sets the current save state is never actually being ran. So if you're just doing some development, you'll just always load the default one, whatever that happens to be. But if you want to test saving and loading specifically, then do it through the main menu, basically. Okay, so I'm probably going to end this part of the tutorial here, and then we'll probably wrap it up in the next one. So if you're enjoying the tutorial, please leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.